We apply what we've learned about the law of detachment and the law of syllogism to develop a deductive reasoning argument and conclusion. So here's our instructions here. Draw a valid conclusion from the given statements if possible. Then state whether your conclusion was drawn using the law of detachment or the law of syllogism. If no valid conclusion can be drawn, write no valid conclusion, explain your reasoning. Now, as we get into this, let's think about this. Let's just review, okay, the law of detachment. I'm going to abbreviate it. Law of detachment would say that if P, then Q, if that's true, and if P is true, well, then Q's got to be true. All right, that's the law of detachment. And basically, we're dealing with a single if-then statement, and we're just looking at the two parts of it, the if part, the hypothesis, the then part, the conclusion. Whereas the law of syllogism usually is going to involve multiple statements, because it would say if P, then Q, if that's true, and if Q, then R, in other words, the conclusion of the first statement becomes the hypothesis of the second statement. If that's true, then if P, then R, it must also be true. In other words, the hypothesis of the first statement combined with the conclusion of the second statement. If all of those, if that's all true, then it's all true. So let's look at our problem here. And so we've got a line segment that we can see. We've got two endpoints. Looks like we got a midpoint. In fact, we're told that the midpoint divides the segment into two congruent segments. Now, it probably would help if I took that first statement and kind of put it in if-then form, in a conditional form, where maybe it would read, if the midpoint, how about if we put if the midpoint divides a segment, then the two segments are congruent, changing that language just a little bit. So if the midpoint divides a segment, then those two segments are congruent. And then we see the second statement in that form. If two segments are congruent, and which is it picking up? It's picking up the conclusion of that first statement. Then the measures are equal. This is kind of like if Q then R, this statement right here. Think about that as if Q then R. All right, then it comes back and says M is the midpoint. In other words, the midpoint, M is the midpoint of A and B if the midpoint divides a segment. In other words, M is dividing that segment of A and B. Then what would our conclusion here be? Well, we could then conclude that their measures are equal, right? That would be the R part of that second statement. We could say then the measures are equal. And we might want to say that as then AM, segment AM, is going to equal MB. Now, which law did we use to come up with this? Does it fit more of the law of detachment, or does it fit more of the law of syllogism? And I got two statements. I got this if P then Q, if Q then R, and then finally we finished it off with if P then R. And so it would really make sense that this has to do with the law of syllogism. Happy deductive reasoning, ladies and gentlemen.